Liza Benkovich, who is on our board of directors, who is facilitating this evening. And we just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. It's just a really emotional time, and we're just so glad that we could all be together and learn from some really amazing women who agreed to lead our session tonight. But in the meantime, I'm going to hand it over to Liza, and hopefully Liza can unmute herself because I don't see her. Oh, there she is. Okay.
No worries.
There you are. Great. And then Carrie and Cortes. But I'm going to let Liza start us off. Thank you so much, Liza, and again, everyone else for joining us this evening.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy. Hi, everybody. I'm Liza Benkovich, as Amy mentioned. I'm heading into my second year as a board member of this wonderful organization that's led by powerful women at the forefront. I'm really honored to be here to kick us off on this deep dive around building our allyship and standing up for justice with and along a Black community. I'd like to share a little bit about why we chose to have this discussion and how it ties back to Judaism. In the Jewish teachings of Pirkei Avot, the world endures on three principles of justice, truth, and peace. There cannot be sustainable peace without truth and justice. Therefore, we as Jews have a responsibility to our teachings and to ourselves to stand up for the social, civic, and criminal injustices that are continually present in our country. So how do we do that? Well, first, being here tonight and participating in the conversation with Justice Warriors Cortes Maria Lewis and Carrie Feit is already a step in the right direction. I'm going to briefly introduce each of our incredible speakers, Cortes and Carrie, and then I'm going to pass off the virtual mic to Cortes to start us off. Cortes Maria Lewis is an activist, an organizer, a motivational speaker, and a returning citizen. Her greatest accomplishment to date is conquering cancer after being diagnosed on March 16, 2013. While she publicly lived her personal testimony of prison, domestic violence, and cancer, the organization CMLE Enterprises was birthed. Cortes now serves as the Director of Advocacy at Women's March Miami and is the newly elected Secretary of Women's March Florida. And now, Carrie Feit is an attorney and also a founder and current co-president of Women's March Florida, heeding the call to march in Washington, D.C. hours after the political event in November 2017. Carrie proudly served as the president of Women's March Miami, a group of women that has guided her on a path of anti-racism and allyship, and who are committed to centering Black, Brown, Indigenous, and trans women and women with disabilities through education and advocacy. I am going to pass off now the virtual mic to Cortes, but before I do that, I would like to say thank you. From my heart, thank you, Cortes, and thank you, Carrie, but both of you for being here tonight, for educating us and helping us better understand and empathize of what it means to be Black, Cortes, you, and specifically what it means to be a Black woman enduring continued racism in 2020.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. Number one, are you able to hear me? Thank you so much. So thank you for that awesome welcome. I'm so excited to just share and to just be here with like-minded women that are looking for the same outcome, but I know we'll go about it differently. And so as an African-American woman, this is a very hurting time period for me. And I specifically say African-American or Black. I don't use people of color because I'm not a person of color. I am in the bracket of African-American or Black. And so it's even heavier for me because this has been going on since slavery. Literally the just dehumanization of a community of people who happen to be Black. And anybody who knows anything about history understands that journey from Africa here. And yes, not everybody came to the United States. A lot of Black folks got dropped off in the Caribbean and the islands. And so, needless to say, for me, racism in my thought process didn't get ugly until it hit the United States. And it has been ugly ever since. And we are seeing this ugliness play out in ways that I never thought in my lifetime that I would see. And I am a native of St. Louis, Missouri. So that can give you some historic backdrop of my experience as a Black woman dealing with racism as a whole. And so I graduated from the University of Missouri, Columbia, which the last lynching was in 1988. I went there in 1991. So just imagine my experience as a 16-year-old freshman on a predominantly white campus with less than 1% African Americans. So having to deal with that piece of it. But what I can say is I thrived through all of it. And it has made me a better woman. And it has made this work for me so much more passionate. I grew up in St. Louis, so I have so much experience with whiteness that I actually view a lot of what we deal with from an empathetic lens. Because unfortunately, you don't know what you don't know until you don't know that you don't know it. Like real talk. And so when you find out that people just don't know, then you have this opportunity to educate, to educate, to educate, to educate. And so you have to educate, you have to have those hard conversations. And as a Women's March member, as a Women's March leader, this is what the work that we have been doing from day one. Now, I have my moments of just pure anger and just frustration and dissatisfaction, and the system is broken and it can't be changed. You just gotta throw it away and start all over. I have those moments, and they are real and they are raw, just because I am Black. So when I think about the murder of a Black unarmed man by police, I'm like, really? Like, we're really doing this in 2020? We're really doing this. And here's what the reality is. Nothing has changed. That's the part that gets me. When you think back to the civil rights movement, women's suffrage movement, all of the historic movements, nothing has changed. Since the murder of Ahmed, when he was running through his neighborhood and was literally chased, followed, and gunned down. The video had to surface for us to even know what happened. I started really listening to audio of Martin Luther King, because we've all heard the major historic speeches, I Have a Dream, you know, but there's some other stuff that he did that people really don't talk about. So you have to go find it yourself. And so I started listening to this stuff, and I'm like, you know what? Being a Midwest girl, visiting Lorraine Hotel every year, because that's what my parents did. They made sure that we were in tune and intact with history. Going there, seeing it, I'm listening to his speeches. He's saying the same stuff that we're dealing with right now today. So nothing has changed since the 60s. Nothing has changed. And so I'm like, so How do we get to change? In what way can everybody as a whole, everybody, I don't care ethnicity, religion, skin color, how do we all get to change? Well, here's my little reality of it. Black folk can't do it. And the reason why we can't do it is because we didn't do it, if that makes sense. So white supremacy has to be dismantled by the people that built it and benefit from it. Okay? So you got to help me, because everywhere I go, I'm seen as an African-American woman. I can't hide that. Now, my name, especially living in Miami, gets me in places, but once I get in there, they're like, oh, she's a Black woman. You know, so even though my name is so Hispanic that when you see me on paper, just name, everybody assumes I'm Hispanic. So that helps me here in Miami. But once I'm physically present, oh, that's a Black girl. So unfortunately, discounted, looked at totally different, not given the respect. And then if I operate in the emotions of how that makes me feel in that moment, then I'm an angry Black woman. So I can't win for losing. And that's okay, because I know how to choose my battles wisely. And so through this, now here we are with Floyd. So let's go back to Emmett Till, okay? So if anybody knows anything about history, let's go back there. Emmett Till was actually the catalyst to the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks was the individual, and the bus boycott was the journey, but the catalyst was Emmett Till. And his mother and aunt, and really his mother more than his aunt, wanted the casket open for a reason, because she wanted the world to see what was done to her son. And that's why that casket was open. We're not getting ready to close the casket and let you just act like it didn't happen. But this happened and it was real, and you're gonna look at it. And so that's what we have there. So you have that, and now here we are with the police officer with his knee in the neck of a full-grown African-American man pleading for his life, and he dies. So you got a lot of people talking about the violence and the looting and the this and the that. So in the words of Malcolm X, the revolution will be televised, and it actually is. And it's on the heels of a pandemic that has affected Black folks mostly. Small businesses, deaths, and rates of getting it. So folks are frustrated. But let's not forget that the movement has been compromised here, okay? So you have white folk looting, tearing up in the name of Black Lives Matter. So not only are we fighting to get things done against police violence, police brutality, now we got to fight to save the name of an organization and a people that started the organization after the murder of Trayvon Martin. And so Black Lives Matter came into existence in that space. And it came into existence in that space very strategically and very intentionally. That's why for years you never knew who the leaders were, and there was never an address or any way to pinpoint where this organization was, for the safety of the movement. So not only do we have to hurt and have pain and be emotionally distraught and have different type of conversations with our young Black people. Then we have to build organizations that we know are going to do what's necessary to be done, but we have to do it in secrecy and silence. And then now we have to fight with the same white folk that's supposed to be allying with us to keep them from tearing down what we're doing and why we're trying to do it. And let's just put the icing on the cake. We have a leader of the free world who is a racist, a narcissist, and in just blatant terms, I think there's some serious mental illness there. And he's our leader, and he is flaming the fire of racism. And so what do we do as Black people? How do we move through this minutia? The only way for us to move through this in our sanctity, because let's talk about it, we should be the craziest people on planet Earth for everything we've gone through, everything we've been through. But guess what? We still thrive. We survive. We continue to push forward. And all we want is just a little help. That's it. Because we've been doing this since we got taken away from our land to come to America. And we've done it well. But at this moment, 2020, we need real folk to stand up and say enough is enough. No more will we stand by and allow this type of brutality. No more will we stand by and allow you to treat people that built the very country that you're in inhumane. How is it that dogs have more rights than Black folk? Like, it just doesn't make sense. And so we tell our people, vote. Voting is the power. Voting is the power. Voting is the power. Voting is the power. Yeah, in a system that's not rigged. In a system where voter suppression is not how people wake up, eat, sleep, and drink it. In a system, in a fair system, it could possibly work. But we know it doesn't work. So we need mouths, and we need people to literally jump past allyship to be an accomplice. So what does that look like? The march that was here this weekend in Broward County, there was a situation, and it's hit national news, where a young lady dropped down to her knees and a white male police officer pushed her. Now, there was no need for him to touch her, none. So a Black female officer got a hold of him. But that wasn't the first time he did that, right? That's why he felt so comfortable in doing it then. So you have a system of human beings that have been allowed to do what they do with no consequences or repercussions. Hence, the officer that put his knee on the neck of that Black man, George Floyd, for 7.52 to 8.15 seconds, with his hands in his pockets and a smirk on his face. Because he's done it before, and there were no consequences or repercussions. And so we march, we protest, we cry, we scream, we raid, we loot, we do all of that. But that's been going on since the 60s, and there has not been a change. There hasn't been. It's still happening. No, the police dogs are not out. The water hoses are not out. But Black folk are still being killed and treat it like we are the scum of the earth. And then everybody sits back and says, well, why are you so angry? Why are you frustrated? Why are you like, are you serious? And let us retaliate. And that's another piece of it. We just want justice. We want equity. We want liberation. Because if we wanted revenge, this would be a totally different scenario. You want to talk about casualties of war? If this was about revenge, it's not about revenge. It's just liberation and equity. And so I know Carrie's going to go into detail about allyship and how that looks. But my ending statement is this. You literally have to look at yourself, and it's a heart matter. Where is your heart? I go to gun reform. And I started off with the Trayvon Martin Foundation when it started bottom and up to where it is right now. So Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin, I was there from day one. And no fight on the levels that people are fighting now for gun reform until Parkland happened here in the state of Florida. So now everybody wants to gun reform because the white kids were murdered. But a gun is a gun, no matter if it's white, black, or in between. And so when do we, the same folk that fighting for the white rights, for the same issues that black people go through, go to the inner city and fight for them? And so these are the things that people got to think about. Where's your heart on these matters? Does a black life just not matter to you? And those are real things. And then once you figure out where your heart is, you got to figure out where the hearts of the people in your house are. Because those are people that you got to live with and you have to commune with. And so if their heart is tainted, that's going to make your household a little uncomfortable. Well, guess what? That's another thing I'm asking for. Get uncomfortable. Because black folks been uncomfortable since we got here. So yes, get uncomfortable. You may have to have a couple debates, hard ones, with family members, with spouses, with loved ones. But if we don't change, it can't do anything but get worse. We're seeing a glimpse of how ugly it can be. Just a glimpse. But if there's not change, it's going to get worse. It is going to get worse. So that's me in the raw, in the nutshell of what's going on. And I want to read something before I pass the mic to my fearless sister, Carrie. And this really hit me, and I did not read it before. And as I was running through my mind and some things, there was a response that a company, a corporate company gave. And this is what they said. The murder of George Floyd was the result of inhumane police brutality that is perpetuated by a culture of white supremacy. What happened to George Floyd was not the result of a bad apple. It was the predictable consequence of a racist and prejudiced system and culture that has treated Black bodies as the enemy from the beginning. What happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis is the fruit born of toxic seeds planted on the shores of our country in Jamestown in 1619, when the first enslaved man and woman arrived on this continent. Floyd is the latest in a long list of names that stretches back to that time and that shore. Some of these names we know, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Oscar Grant, Eric Gartner, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Emmett Till, Martin Luther King, but most we don't. So I'll leave you with that, and I will pass it on to my fearless sister, co-director, leader, Carrie Feit.
Okay, I think I unmuted myself, yes? I just first want to thank my sister, Cortes Maria Lewis, who I'm so honored to be here with, and for taking on the emotional labor of taking folks through her pain, taking you through the Black lens of of going through what we're going through, and just honor her for that work. I see that there's the folks, I'm noticing the folks that have joined this Zoom, and I'm so honored. I have sort of put together my thoughts as our introduction to allyship, making the assumption that a lot of folks are at the very beginning of this journey. I see that there's Black folks on this Zoom, and obviously I have nothing to teach y'all about allyship to your own community, so I just want to acknowledge and recognize that. I also see that there are movement sisters with me on this Zoom that are with me laterally in this journey, so I will be preaching to the choir with a lot of this stuff. And it's a heavy topic, so even the introduction has a lot of pieces, so I'm just going to jump into it and get started. But I'm so honored and humbled to be here, and thank you all for including me. So I want to lay some sort of ground rules and groundwork before we can even talk about allyship. And this has to do with what I've seen really on social media with a lot of white folks who are newly talking about racism, which is definitely a great thing, and we want that, and we want to encourage that. But part of the comments that folks are making do need to be unpacked. We do need to sort of point out some misconceptions so that we can make this allyship effective, and also so that it doesn't cause harm to Black folks that are reading these comments. There's been a sentiment out there, there's been a lot of outrage that's sort of like, I can't believe this is happening, and Cortes sort of touched on this, that sort of like the lack of recognition that this has been happening. There has always been anti-Blackness, racism in this country, and there's been statements made that, this wasn't the case where I grew up, or not in my family. So I just want to kind of lay out the ground rule and the assumption that we know we need to recognize that anti-Black bias has been, despite some of us having the privilege to not have had awareness about that, and is everywhere, in your town, in my town, everywhere we grew up, and also lives inside each one of us, right? It's in the air we breathe, it's in the water we drink, and a lot of times we tap into it unconsciously and implicitly because of that. Studies have shown that we hold anti-Blackness from an extremely young age, because it's literally in everything that we take. It's in all the messages all around us. So that's the first thing we really need to acknowledge. Now, when we talk about white privilege, which is another sort of thing that's been talking about on social media, the way that I would frame that is, for white folks, it's our societal benefits, it's our institutional and systemic advantage, it's our intergenerational resource and wealth that we were born into. And that does create a debt owed. That does create an obligation to use your privilege, whether that's your resources or your skills or your expertise, to support someone who may not have access to the same. The last thing I just want to lay out there before we get started on allyship is this notion of being colorblind. It seems folks are still talking about colorblind, sort of thinking that it's a positive thing. It's a way to sort of illustrate that they're not racist. And not seeing the color of someone's skin, it not only erases their culture, but it erases their struggles, it erases their lack of privilege, or ignores the fact that they may have had to work harder, smarter, and with obstacles where you may have not have to get to the same exact place. So when you think about it, being colorblind is sort of the opposite of recognizing systemic racism, right? And we want to see color because we want equity, right? And I say equity versus equality. Now, I don't know how folks, how familiar you are with the term equity versus equality. But there's like this really famous graphic that's really out there that most folks have seen, where there's three people of different heights. There's a very short person, a medium height person, and a tall person. And there's a fence, and only the tall person can see over the fence, right? And so the middle height person could kind of see over the fence. The short person can't see over the fence. Equality would be all of those people, no matter who they are, where they came from, all of those people get one box. Equity would be that the real short person would get 2 boxes, the middle height person would get 1 box, and the tall person, he doesn't even need a box, he could already see over the fence. So you have that imagery of now everyone can see over the fence, right? So that's the graphic interpretation of that. So again, I'm going to assume that most folks on here are newer to the practice of allyship, and what I'm going to talk about is definitely a jumping off point. I want to make very clear that I am new at this too. I am by no means a lifelong anti-racist. It was just a few years ago that my awareness was widened and sharpened, and I developed a commitment to collective liberation, which is the idea that our liberation is tied to one another. It's the idea that none of us are free until all of us are free. And I start with this idea because it's going to help the practice of being an ally come more naturally. When we think in terms of we instead of you or I, allyship will be most meaningful when we recognize that while we're not part of the marginalized group, that group's oppression impacts our liberation. That you're not free if your sisters and brothers are not free. So standing with or alongside a group of folks also ties into being empathetic instead of sympathetic. Because we want empathy and not sympathy. We don't want to feel bad for folks through our lens. We want as much as possible to imagine how it is to walk in their shoes. We're never going to feel their pain or live their experience, but we want to try as hard as possible to feel like what it may feel like to be them. And this also ties, this idea of standing alongside or with, also ties what Cortes referred to, why in movement spaces the word accomplice is favored or even replacing the word ally, right? We've all been hearing about that. So speaking of language, it's important to understand that the concept of being an ally as we use it with regard to a non-marginalized person's work with and alongside marginalized communities is a verb. Now, of course, I don't mean in the dictionary sense. If you look up the word ally, it's going to be a noun. But it means that so you can't really self-identify as an ally. It is not a noun. You can have a practice of allyship. You can practice being an ally. It's a continuous practice in which there is always room to do better, right? You're never going to nail it. You're always going to be striving to do better at it. It's also a mindset. It's a commitment. It's something that needs to hold great importance to you and in which you are invested so that it could be sustainable. So build relationships instead of having transactional connections, and definitely root your allyship in education, right? Cortes and I are big fans of education with our advocacy, right? So read with a preference for Black authored material whenever possible, right? You can only practice allyship meaningfully if you understand systems of oppression, if you understand how systemic racism works. I think the most impactful learning that you can probably do is listen to people of color and accept their experiences and their perspective as valid and true. And that might seem like a weird thing to say, well, why wouldn't we? But when you reflect on this later, I want you to think about how white folks are always given the benefit of the doubt, and sometimes Black folks are not. They're made to prove what they're saying, right? So we talk about bias and debiasing, and debiasing ourselves, like Cortes also referred to, is such a big part of allyship. It's really the first part of allyship. You have to recognize that we all have bias. It's an ongoing practice. I catch myself in bias daily. And it's really, I've learned to really love those moments of learning and growth and lean into those moments, because it really does make me a better person, a better ally, and it really creates more love in my heart. So one practice, just something that you can start doing, is catch yourself in those biases, call it out within yourself, and self-correct. Also, you need to call out bias in others around you, which in the appropriate circumstance can be done in a non-adversarial manner. Ideally, you don't want to turn somebody off and be real, cause some sort of fight or struggle where the person just sort of turns away. Ideally, you want to have a chance to impact that person, have a conversation with them. So one thing that I do that I've been taught to do that's really effective, I think, when you catch someone in a bias or a racist statement, is to just ask them questions, right? Like, oh, why would you say that? Well, take me through that. Why do you think that? Why would you think that? And in doing so, you're really forcing the person to look at logically why they came to that negative assumption. And usually it results in them self-correcting and saying, well, I guess that's not really the case, and so you have a chance to impact them. Of course, there's situations where you do need to be more aggressive with calling out bias, right? And that situation is usually when there is somebody in the space that could be negatively impacted by that bias. You always need to, of course, censor the person that's going to be impacted or harmed. So when there's somebody in the space that could be harmed, that's no longer, that moment is no longer about teaching this person or bettering this person or debiasing this person. It's about the person that could be potentially harmed, right? So your focus is switched. You do, however, always need to check in with that person, right? That could be potentially harmed. That person, that Black person, may very well want to speak up for themselves. They might be having a good day and they want to take on the emotional labor at that moment and they don't mind it. Or they might not be in the mood to teach white people on that day, and they might want you to speak up for them. So whatever way, depending on the relationship with that person, and I did this with Cortes the other day. I checked in with her, and I said, let me know if because you have to, it depends on the situation. I mentioned emotional labor. So I want to sort of pull that out for you and kind of explain what that is for those folks that don't know. So Black people take on emotional labor, as Cortes, Maria Lewis just did, every time they teach non-Black folks about their history, their pain, our allyship, our mistakes, or how we can do better. Sometimes it's unplanned. Sometimes you're in a conversation. If they're a friend of yours, they might be willing to take on that labor. Sometimes it's planned, like today, right? Where Cortes decided to be in the space and do that. Hopefully it's paid in some way. I just want to lift that up, that Black people, especially Black women, should be paid for their emotional labor whenever possible. Now, of course, in situations where we're coming together like this, it's not always the case, and I'm not trying to say anything in that regard. But just as like a first step for allyship for those folks that are on here, something that you can do, for example, I know Cortes's Venmo is @Cortes_Lewis. You could throw her some appreciation. And really, it's not about, the few dollars you might send. It's about saying, in this capitalist society where we don't value this work, it's saying, I value this work, right? So even sometimes if I'm talking to a friend who's a person of color or a Black friend, and I have a conversation with them and they help me work something through, I Venmo them. Thank you. Thank you for taking that labor on. And that's a form of allyship. Important, do not expect Black people to take on emotional labor to educate you. It happens, definitely, they do it, but don't expect it. Also, when you have to work out your fragility or your missteps, which definitely will come up in your journey to allyship, talk to other white people, right? Keep that in white spaces. Don't put that emotional labor on Black folks. Another way that you can really take the best way to take emotional labor off of Black folks to teach you about racism or allyship is educate yourself. Like I mentioned, read, watch, listen. There is an abundance of information out there. So before you go ask your Black friend, or research it. Next thing I want to talk about is to donate. Donating is a great form of allyship. If you only donate to the local organizations that you know about in Miami that are doing the work, that for decades, that actually connects to our collective liberation, you want to support that work, right? You don't want to create your own organization or your own initiative and get in front of that work. You want to get behind those folks and support that work that's been done for decades in service for our collective liberation. Also, you want to recognize the pay gap when it comes to social justice work and the way that's not really valued in society. So that's another reason to donate to especially local Black-led organizations doing work for liberation, right? You've heard this, I'm sure. This is you need to, of course, show up. You need to show up and you need to stay involved. So definitely show up to meetings, circles, conversations, protests, rallies, if a Black person asks you to do so, or if a Black organization asks you to do so when you can. Then it's not just that you go to one event and boom, you're an ally. You need to stay connected, right? You need to follow up. You need to find out the next steps. You need to find out the next involvement, right? I'm going fast because there's so many things and I just want to get it all in. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know a lot of folks in this space know this because I've seen your faces. Okay, so in Black spaces, speaking of showing up, be mindful about not taking up too much space as us white people tend to do. Constantly still catching myself on that, right? We tend to feel the need to contribute our thoughts to a conversation instead of sitting back and listening in order to feel productive or in order to show our worth, right? That's what we do. But in the practice of allyship, you're in a learning space. You're in a learning space to develop empathy and to literally understand a struggle. Black folks want you there, but we need to realize that it's a space for them, right? Which is very much needed in a white dominant culture. Basically every other space is for white people, right? So in Black spaces, keep it for them, don't take up too much space. And the other reason to sit back and listen, we obviously have so much to learn about racism and oppression from Black people, no matter your age, no matter how long you've been marching, right? You probably have not been marching in the heart of the struggle that Black folks have been marching for, right? The last thing I want to say about these spaces, they can be intense, they could be emotional, you may experience feelings of shame or fragility. You will experience, when we talk about our legacy and our ancestors and how obviously this oppression is connected to our people, you will experience feelings of shame or fragility. That's okay. I'm not saying to stifle those. I'm saying to process those in white spaces. There are plenty of white spaces you can process those feelings in, right? Don't cry in the Black spaces. Don't take up space, cry in the white spaces. Okay, now when it comes to your own sphere of influence, right? And again, I'm gonna take, these thoughts are coming from stuff I've been seeing on social media with, again, white folks that are sort of newly talking about racism, which is definitely great. We want to encourage. However, we need to recognize and be careful that it's not about, these statements about racism are not about making yourself feel good or about feel-good statements that everybody can get behind that are already popular. And it's definitely not about how the injustice affects you. I mean, I'm sure you've all said, oh, I just can't sleep, I can't eat. It's not the place to talk about, you're not the person who really should be talking about how you're affected by the injustice, right? Instead, while people are talking about racism where they never did before, push your folks to task in this moment. We know that people move into growth when they go beyond their comfort zone, right? So be thought-provoking, be unafraid to examine your own biases outwardly, right? Allyship in your circles should be slightly uncomfortable, and you should be taking risks, right? So we talk about discomfort a lot. It's like a theme, right? It is. Allyship is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable when saying unpopular things in your sphere of influence. It's uncomfortable when you're in Black spaces and you're worried about centering. It's uncomfortable to get checked by people of color on your bias and your language. But again, discomfort is what leads to growth. So lean into it. Be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And always be mindful that your discomfort pales in comparison to the discomfort and pain that Black folks experience regularly, right? So, and also the last bit of that is that white people's comfort is catered to way too much in our society, and it's oftentimes the reason for the discomfort of people of color. And so I've actually learned to, and when I first started going to meetings and such, I struggled because it was uncomfortable. And I said, well, I'm not doing this right because I don't want to center myself and I'm not sure if I should be here. And then I finally realized, oh, it's just always going to be uncomfortable, right? And that's okay. That means I'm doing something right, right? So speaking of mistakes and such, and this is really important to know, and I know I'm talking about a lot of things like sort of like that feel like rules and stuff, but here's what's going to make it a little bit better. Mistakes are expected. Black folks expect you to make mistakes. White folks expect you to make mistakes. They're going to happen all the time. Everyone makes them, right? Here's the key with mistakes. Acknowledge them, learn, and move on. That's it. Do not be performative in your apology or your regret. You know, acknowledge and move on. And you will, and say you'll do better, and you will do better, right? The other thing that I want to raise up here is don't look for praise or thanks. That's really going to see, because we always do look for praise or thanks. So if I tell you, if somebody tells you that at the outset and you don't expect it, it's not going to feel bad. When you think about it, you really can't look for praise for speaking out against inhumanity, which we should all be doing, right? It's nothing to be thanked, right? You will be thanked, by the way, but it's going to take a long time. Like I said, it's a practice. You have to earn the trust of folks that you're pledging allyship to. It's going to take a while to be thanked, right? And then just a word about saviorism, we've heard this term, all of us probably, white saviorism. And I know it used to first come up in movie tropes and such, but I think the way it shows up mostly today is when a group of white people that are not meaningfully connected to a particular struggle, right? They believe that they can take action to significantly improve or even solve a problem without understanding the years of work that actually had gone on in that community. And so what that erases is that the community actually has their own leaders and their own voice, right? So it's important that as allies, we take a supporting role versus a center role and support sustainable community-led solutions versus attempting to be the solution, right? So I kind of rambled through everything, and it's 7:50, and that's good. I know it sounds like there's a lot of rules and you know, but these are the tools for effective allyship. It is uncomfortable, but it is beautiful, and you should be doing it for our collective liberation. That's the right reason to do it. That will keep you invested, that will keep you sustained, and it is a commitment.
Awesome. This is why I call Carrie my sister. A lot of people yeah, she is my sister. And we have grown. And let me tell you, if you're looking for allyship to being an accomplice, this is your go-to person. I have seen this woman evolve. And she's so hard on herself. We all in this space make the mistakes. And when she said just acknowledge it and move on, acknowledge it and move on. I'm still learning how to do pronouns. And it's when I'm in that space, I have to be so cognizant. If someone says that they are he, him, but I'm looking through the lens of that person being she, her, hers, I have to check myself. And I allow people to check me in that moment because I have to honor what that individual is saying that they are. And so it's simple. Oh my God, I'm sorry, my fault. Keep reminding me, keep telling me, and so once you get it, and literally when I say it's not as hard as it's made out to be. No one is looking for you to come rescue. No one is looking for you to come and be this knight in shining armor. No, it's just a link support that is saying you are human, you are valued, and you are worth me being uncomfortable to make sure that your community can be comfortable. Y'all know it literally, genetically, Black folks' genetics are altered because of the trauma. Go study that. That's why we're so predisposed to everything. The journey from Africa to America has altered our DNA. This is just how crazy this is. And then you hear people say, well, I didn't even realize it. Where you been? Like, that's just how real it is. So it affects us generationally. It affects our health. And everybody knows without health, you can't function. Like really, you have a runny nose and your whole day off. So just imagine being a Black person with high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, like you name it, because of trauma that we didn't inflict on ourselves, but that was inflicted on us. And if it wasn't inflicted directly, then we have to watch it through our family, our parents, our siblings, our aunts, our uncles. So this fight and this struggle is real. And anybody that's Black is pleading for those in privilege to take a stand. If you have never taken a stand for anything in your life, today, June 3rd, 2020, at approximately 7:54 p.m., Cortes Maria Lewis is saying, stand. Because if you don't stand now, you may be kneeling later. So thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Carrie, I love you.
By the way, I wanted to mention in putting these thoughts together, I did, because I'm a big nerd, sort of like accidentally create like a guide. Told Amy that, which I put together for you all. So I can, if you think it would be helpful, everything I talked about, I can share with everybody.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Cortes, for sharing your hearts with us tonight and for educating us. Thank you, everyone, for being on the call with us tonight. I'm looking through the chat to see a lot of the things that I was seeing in the chat look like they were like comments, support. The Ben and Jerry's information was shared, and I will send a follow-up email. So I'll share that Ben and Jerry's information. I'll share Cortes's Venmo. Thank you, Cortes. Thank you, Carrie, for sharing.
Yeah, there's a note in here, I think, about pronouns, which is a good point about asking somebody, you know, what their pronouns are, and then when you make a mistake, to ask them going forward. So yeah, pronouns are really important. Happy to, you know, add to uplifting that. I think that you know, we misstepped here. We should have all introduced ourselves. But we didn't even introduce ourselves at all. I think that I just jumped in because I was so worried about getting through it. Our names, our pronouns, very important to make folks feel like they can share, that everybody can share their pronouns. And so we usually do start a meeting with pronouns. And I had a big misstep in the last few months with that. That I missed the beginning of a meeting where people were sharing pronouns and I came in the middle. And even though I probably should have known that this person did not go by he, him, I referred to them that way. And somebody came up to me after the meeting and said, you know, I just want to let you know that this person goes by them. And, you know, you misgendered them. And, you know, and I said, you know, I immediately went and I tried to be as least performative as possible, because that's not what we want to do. And I said, I really understand how I erased you at that moment, and I'm very sorry, and I will do better. And they were really happy with that, and I'm good friends with them now. So really important, very hard, very difficult, very uncomfortable for folks that aren't used to it, but really, really important not to feel that and invisibilize people by not using the pronouns that they use. Right.
I just want to add. Sorry.
So much. I'm sorry. Uplifting Ferguson, Missouri. Like I told you all, I am from St. Louis, and Ferguson is a county within St. Louis. And I actually went to high school with Mike Brown's mom. So for Ferguson to grow like they have, to now have elected the first African-American mayor, who happens to be a woman, is a major step in the right direction. And so just to throw in a plug, please vote. And I'm pretty sure I'm preaching to the choir here. You gotta vote, and you gotta be informed when you're voting. And I just am unapologetic and very intentional that I vote Black and I vote woman, period. And so That's what I do.
And that's a really good segue into one of our 4 pillars that we're focusing on as we head into our 100th anniversary, our centennial year, is voter and civic engagement. And stay tuned, because we will be doing some deeper dives into how you can get more engaged in taking action around voting and the upcoming elections and voting by mail, where NCJW is very supportive of getting registered to vote by mail.
Which is what we're going to need to do for 220, everyone. We're still in a pandemic.
Yes, 7:59. I'm going to do a quick share of my screen, just so you can take a look at a few things that we have coming up. Oh, and then there's a question in the chat.
Also, Amy, if we're gonna mention voting, we have to talk about Melba Pearson. We're on a call about, like, we're talking about police brutality, police accountability, and we have the Miami-Dade State Attorney race, Melba Pearson, who is trying to take the seat from an incumbent who hasn't prosecuted police for anything in decades. And so if you're gonna get involved in any race that has to do with allyship, and standing up for Black and brown folks, get involved with Melba Pearson and get her elected.
So I heard that there's a question in the chat, but I'm not seeing it. Oh, I have a question that isn't related to allyship, but is related to police brutality. Cortes mentioned at the beginning of this call that sometimes she feels like starting from scratch and dismantling these systems altogether. I've been seeing a lot of conversations about defunding the police and various forms of transformative justice. How viable do you think that is versus reforming the existing police system? That's a big.
It is my personal opinion. Literally, it's not working. So there is no reform. It has to be broken and just started over. And that's the whole mentality that keeps everything going. We cannot continue to put band-aids on things. When there's cancer, you have 3 things that happen: chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. It got to come out. And so our system, our criminal justice system across the board is broken. So when something is broke, guess what? You throw it away and you get something new. Now, how does new look? We got to sit and we got to talk about it, because here's the truth. Not all police officers are bad. They're not. But it's a system that allows them to operate as they operate. And it allows those that want to come forward not be able to come forward for risk of your job, for being harassed on the job, for being bullied on the job. Like the real stuff that goes on that the persons in blue don't talk about and can't talk about. Look at Miami-Dade County. Why do we have a Black police association, a white police association, and a Hispanic police association, if y'all all police? Because it's systematic. So we got to get this system, we got to dismantle white supremacy. And Black and brown folk can't do it because we didn't build it. So that's what the entire criminal justice system needs to be just put in the trash can. All of it. Now, like I said, I don't have an answer of how it looks. Sometimes it's just like our school systems. Like everything that's a system sometimes doesn't evolve with the changes necessary. And so getting the right folks elected into those offices, standing up, taking a stand. If you pay taxes, you have rights to question everything in your city and in your county. And folks have to give you answers. Now, the difference between me and you can walk in as a white woman and get all the information as soon as you ask for it, no problem. I walk in, I'm gonna get the runaround. But that's okay, because I'm gonna run around with you until I get it in the end. So if I call you and tell you, hey, I need you to go get this information, that's allyship. Because I don't have the capacity at that moment to be ran around. So yes, scrap it.
There's a question in the chat about what you think may happen in the Floyd case. And Cortes, if you have an opinion, if anybody has an opinion, but again, Melba does these amazing, like every other day, she does these lives where she like goes through everything that's going on with the charges. And I'm sure she'll do one with the news today that the charge was upgraded and that they charged the other police officers. I'm sure maybe she even did one, I don't think, but she'll probably do one tomorrow to work through that. So go to Melba go to her page. She'll take you through everything with the George Floyd case and what she thinks is gonna happen. And she's a really good person to listen to about that, yeah.
And so that's another piece. Like if you don't know the law and you don't know the legal system, you can be thrown off in so many ways in the emotion. And so you got to research that stuff, and you have to know, like there are still certain states in our union that lynching is legal. So guess what? That need to come off the books. But it's on the books. So if in a state, somebody decides to lynch somebody, and literally there's the law that backs them. So these are the things that we have to continue to educate each other on. When you learn something new, share it. Don't keep it a secret. So I don't know what's going to happen with the Floyd case to answer that question, because Minnesota has its own laws. I'm very challenged with the fact that they are now civilian men. They're no longer police officers. So what precedents are we setting when we're not holding police officers accountable for this murder, but now we're holding regular civilians accountable because they were fired immediately? So I want to know how that's going to play out. But that's just my opinion. The arrest was good. It was first, the upcharge. But if there's no conviction, i.e. Rodney King, if there's no conviction, bunker down, because it's going to get real ugly real fast.
Well, we are at our time, a little over our time, but it's been a really, really important discussion, conversation. Thank you again, Carrie and Cortes, for sharing your space with us tonight. And thank you to everybody who joined us tonight, because this was definitely for a lot of us an intro to this, to empathy and allyship, so that we can stand for justice with you, with the Black community. And we are here to do that, to be educated and to learn and to grow and support you. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight again. Thank you. Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy, for having us. Thank you. You belong to an amazing organization. We've done work before. We're going to continue this work. This is not the end. We're in the middle of it.
This is a beginning.
Exactly.
This is a beginning.
So please,
Each day
whatever
is a new day.
Don't hesitate to reach out. We're here. We are support for each other, and we got to do this. Look, we're women. So we, as women, we got the same challenges and issues. So let's help each other out to get this world to where it needs to be. Thank you all for showing up.
Thank you, everyone. Look out for a follow-up email and about some deeper diving together, because we're going to keep swimming. And thank you, everyone. That was a Jenny personism. But thanks all. Good night.